Things get tense in a neighborhood near Pulpit Rock as protesters surround the home of one of the Colorado Springs officers at the center of the Devon Bailey shooting.
Tonight, that neighborhood remains on edge despite the fact that protesters, for the most part, went home hours ago. Good evening. I'm Bart Bedsole.
And I'm Heather Skoll. Thanks for making us your choice for your news at 10 o'clock. 1 year ago today, 19-year-old Devon Bailey was shot and killed by police while running away from officers. His death sparking protests, including the one we saw today. This one, however, was different.
More than 50 people marched to the home of a Colorado Springs police officer who was involved in that shooting. The resulting tensions prompting police to send out a reverse 911 alert to neighbors, telling them to shelter in place.
News Channel 13's Chase Golightly joins us live where the march happened. And Chase, well after the protesters left, there was a second demonstration of sorts.
Heather, Bart, that's correct. The only protesters that remain here in this neighborhood are these ones sitting on the corner right here. You can see the Justice for Devon signs over here. Like I said, only 2 protesters in this area, but the new group that came out is actually neighbors in the area. As you can see, they are standing over here in this area, probably say a couple dozen. They were called out because they heard that because of the protest that was happening earlier, some of the protesters getting confrontation with neighbors here. So that's why this group is out here. They want to try to protect the neighborhood and make sure no large groups of protesters are coming down in this area. But we're going to go ahead and show you what the scene looked like earlier here today. On the anniversary of Devon Bailey's death, about 50 protesters marched on the home of one of the officers involved in the shooting, calling for him to be fired.
People want something, it happens. So this is what people need to want, is for this man to be fired at the very minimum.
A handful of protesters armed with guns keeping watch over the scene. Those same armed protesters seen blocking vehicles from getting through, like these 2 trucks, as tensions started to flare. CSPD officers telling protesters to move out of the way.
In order to keep this protest lawful, please move to the sidewalk. Do not block the roadway.
Some protesters did just that, while others were more confrontational, throwing items at the trucks and hitting the sides and hoods as they drove through. Neighbors tell us they were warned yesterday about the protest. The news not well received.
Lots of negative talks about it.
Arguments between neighbors and protesters ensued. One neighbor seen holding this rifle outside his front door as the crowd moved through the area. And despite all the drama and a few close calls, no fights or altercations broke out. Some arguments ending with both sides coming together. At the end of the protest, everyone arrived back at the parking lot where the whole thing started. Things quieting as they held a moment of silence for Devon Bailey. But back at the home, Colorado Springs SWAT stayed parked outside just in case protesters came back. Then later, a new group came out. More people armed with guns, but this time to protect the neighborhood. They were rallied here by John Tigan, a former government contractor who provided security during the Benghazi ambush. He tells us that once he heard that some protesters with guns were getting into altercations with these neighbors, he decided to step in.
Going into someone's neighborhood and going after their family directly, that's not cool with me, especially when you show up with guns. That just escalated. That went from protesting the individual to me to a direct threat against the individual.
Telling us he will be here all night if he needs to. As for a police presence, that SWAT vehicle is actually not in this area anymore. We did see a CSPD vehicle just drive right down the area. You can actually see the back of its taillights right there. Again, the only protesters here, probably about 5 protesters. It's that other group, the ones carrying firearms and saying that they're here to protect the neighborhood. That's the large group, probably about a couple dozen over here. Again, they say that they're going to be here all night to make sure everything's safe. We haven't heard any word about more protesters showing up. We'll be sure to bring you the latest details on what's going on here in this neighborhood as it unfolds. Reporting live in Colorado Springs, Chase Golightly, KRDO News Channel 13.